The warp function in Mistika allows us to deform a 2D image based on the settings of a grid. The warp function can be found under FX and warp. The warper can have one input or two inputs. With one input, it allows us to deform the image. With two, it allows us to build a morph, a transition from one image to the other. The warper is one of the tools in Mistika that actually has its own interface. So double clicking to go into the Compose window, we can see we've got an option to open the warper. So click on it and we'll get a default mesh and the image that is on input 1. With a single input, simply grabbing a point and moving it will allow us to deform the image. The controls for the warper are relatively straightforward. We have a frame dragger to drag through our shot. In this case I've got a still image. The green marker here indicates a keyframe. Keyframes can be moved by holding down Control and dragging them. Over here we have the usual array of zoom controls and playback controls, and the back obviously takes us back to the normal interface. Use drag mode is normally off, meaning that the distortion that I create is related only to the point that I'm moving. If I use drag mode and create a wide drag radius, we can see that actually my drag proportionally moves other control points depending on how far away they are from the point that I'm actually moving. These sections are duplicated. You can see we have the same set of controls twice, one under source and one under destination. The reason for the duplication becomes more obvious when we start morphing, because we have controls for the image from which we are morphing, the source, and for the image to which we are morphing, the destination. In this case I only have one input, so I only have a destination. The controls allow me to hide the image, hide the mesh, reset a keyframe, or delete a keyframe, clear all the keys to completely reset the mesh. Bring all keys and bring key relate to the fact that there are in fact two meshes. As we can see here, there's a green mesh and there's a red mesh. The red mesh is associated with the source image and can have its own set of keyframes. So the bring all keys or bring key allows you to grab keyframes from the red mesh to the green mesh or vice versa. We also have some viewing controls over here. We can draw the points, the control points, or hide them. And the lines we can hide also if we want to. If our lines are hard to see, they can have borders, make them a little stronger. Each point has tangents that can be hidden if we want to. So just take that out of drag mode and we can see that the tangent of that line can be pulled around. Draw patches allows us to see the subdivisions that Mistika is using to break up the image, and that's controllable in the parameters of the effect. We can also dim all the points we're not touching, just in case that helps us see the image more clearly, and undim all simply reverses that. If we're working with very high resolution images and the interface gets a little slow, we can switch to the user definable lower resolution. I'll come back to the purpose of these shortly, but just over here there's a reset tangent, so whatever we have selected I can cancel any changes I've made to the tangents. By default autofix is on, so wherever we are we can make a keyframe change. So you can see the two keyframes, the green ones being the destination mesh here and here. Or if we prefer, we can turn autofix off, so a keyframe is only ever entered manually by pressing add key. And the meshes that we create, obviously we can save and load. When using the warper in reality, the first thing we'd normally do is set up a new mesh, because this default grid may not be perfectly applicable to the image we're working with. So we can set up a new grid of any size we like. And we're warned that as we change the grid, obviously we lose all our keyframe information because they're not valid anymore. So we can change the grid to be whatever we like. But also we can custom make a grid to match the image we're working with. So if I go new mesh, but I'll actually go 1 by 1, which only gives me a box around the edge. But by using the select row and column and add line, delete line, I can make a mesh that fits the image that I want to play with. So let's say I just wanted to make some distortions around the face area. If I select this point and go select column, we can see that in fact that entire column has been selected. So with the column selected, we can see add line has come to life. So I'm just going to click add line, and we can see that this line has gone white, meaning that there's a new line ready to be dragged into position. So I'll just grab one of the points and drag it. Let's put a point on the end of his nose, for example, here. So in order to get a point on the end of his nose, I also want a new row. So I can select any point on a particular row. This function will allow me to select all the other points on that row, and now I can add line. So again, having added the line, I can now drag this down. So now I have a point on the end of the nose. If I wanted to restrict the area that I'm deforming, then I can continue to build a mesh by using the same functions. So select column, add line, and drag the line to somewhere else. Add another line. So now we can see that the deforms are being restrained within those points. Now because Mistika is calculating a tangent through these points, you can see that if I pull a lot, we'll get a little bit of reaction on this side. If we didn't want that, then actually we could restrict it by adding a second column quite close in. So doing that, for example, has made sure that this is now locked. Having set up a warp, there are actually only a couple of simple parameters to control the warp. By default, grade and mix will have a transition from 0 to 100. Mix is only relevant if you have two inputs. Grade is the amount of distortion that's applied. So if I delete it, we can see that by changing it on 0, the warp that we applied is not there, and then by animating it up to 100, we get 100% of the deformation that we put in. So this allows us to either fine-tune or perhaps put in some animation as well. We could also change the subdivisions to change the quality of the warp, and the direction can be flipped. So that's using a warp with a single input to bend an image around. Let's have a look at how we would affect an actual morph between two different images. So here I have two still images, and the first thing I've done actually is I've added a framing node just to get them roughly in the same place, because initially they were in different places in the frame. And the way I did that was just add a framing node, and then under edit I just used a 50% mix just so I could get them roughly in the right place, just on their eyes and generally the size of their faces, just to give me a starting point. So selecting both, let's go to warp. So it now has those as two inputs, and start with a new mesh. So now that we have warp in a two input mode, this duplication will start to make more sense. So here I can show the image of the destination, or I can show the image of the source. So I have a green mesh for the destination, the shot that I'm heading towards, and I have a red mesh for the one I'm coming from. So to set up a morph, what we need to do is to set up a grid where the cross points of the grid coincide with particular points of interest in our two frames. And it's generally a process of just continually adding points until we get a smooth morph. So right now, because we're using the morph in default settings, so in our parameters we have the mix and the grade animating. If I put up show image on both source and destination, we can see as we drag through, we've got nothing cleverer than a mix going on between the two. So let's start to make a morph. So firstly, with my source image and mesh selected, I'm just going to grab a point, select a column, add a line, and the first points of interest, I'm going to go for the center of the eyes. So there's two columns in place. Now I'm just going to select a row and add a line. And just put those on the center of the eyes. Let's leave autofix on, add a keyframe in there. Now I'm working with still images. If this was a moving image, what I'd also need to do is just drag along my shot and place these so that these points stay, in this case, on the eyeballs. So having done that, I can now go to the destination image, and you can see that a grid has been formed with the same number of points. So here what I just need to do is to move these, which I know to be the points that are on the center of the eye on our source shot. So I just need to move them to be the center of the eyes on our incoming shot. And having done that, as long as we enable both images, we can start to see that a morph is beginning to take place. We can see the eyes are widening in order to accommodate the position of each other. And actually, if we have both meshes up as well, we can see how a single mesh is created that effectively moves from the position of one mesh to the position of the other mesh. So having got our first point in place, we can start to look for problems or duplications around the image. So we can see, for example, partway through the morph, the nose isn't particularly believable because we're getting a double image there. So let's go on to add some points onto the nose. So select row, add line, and bring the line down. And now let's move these 2 points to be in the middle of the nostrils. And as we can see, when we go to the destination image, those 2 points have been put in, so we just need to know that these are the points that go onto the nostrils. We can always see what we've changed straight away just by enabling both images and dragging up and down. So now we can see that our morph is slightly improved in that our nose is now making a nice shape change as well. So to get a perfect morph, we just simply keep adding cross sections in our mesh until all the double imaging is taken care of. So let's do one perhaps around the bottom of the mouth. Now I could put a number of points on the source image all in one go. The reason I'm doing them a set at a time is that sometimes when you've got lots of points and then you switch over to look at the other image, you can't quite remember which point goes where. So doing them one at a time like this, to a certain extent, makes things a little easier. But also, what you'll sometimes find is adding one line, particularly if you add lines that are close together. When you look at the morph, actually the image starts to tear up because you're telling it to pull pixels in conflicting directions. So in which case, adding a line at a time or a couple of lines at a time means that as you continually look to see how you're progressing, you can see whether you've done anything that actually has made the morph worse, and then you can just simply nip out that line. It's a little harder to do when you've got a squillion lines on the screen. When you have tangents on, watch out for things like this, because that's likely to cause a breaking in the image, just because of the way it's being bent around. And also watch out for this mistake. You can see I've just happily put this grid around his chin, but look, I've actually got the mesh for the destination up, not the source. So that's the mesh that should be on that image. So you can see it's in the wrong place. So obviously that would cause an error in my morph. After a while you get used to knowing that the red mesh is for your source. Of course, it's easy to undo the error because you just simply move it to match the right image. So piece by piece you can build up a very accurate morph between two different images. And as with all good demonstrations, here's one I prepared earlier. This actually was for a different reason than I'd normally do a morph, in that what happened in this particular shot, if I extend out the original, within this take there was a problem in that the boy actor paused for a little bit too long before operating his visor, and so he wanted to take out about a second of the action in the middle of the shot without using a cutaway. So in this instance I actually used a morph in order to hide a join in a jump cut. So we can see on the morph here how it's laid out, that from my incoming shot 250, the source of the warp starts on the very next frame, but then the destination, as you can see, is a second and a bit later. So within the warp you can see there's a lot of points that are all working together in order to mask the fact that there's a jump cut. The result isn't totally transparent, but if you don't know it's there, then you probably wouldn't notice it. It's just in there. So that's how we can use warping on Mistika, either to do a transition between two shots or to distort a single shot, either just for an effect or maybe to reduce lens distortion or any other reason why we'd want to apply a 2D deform to a shot.